They were supposed to represent the absolute peak of women's basketball, the WNBA Finals. Two powerhouse teams, championship stakes at their highest, star talent spread across the floor. Yet when A'ja Wilson and Diana Taurasi walked onto the court, they didn't step into a thunderous atmosphere. Instead, they faced vast sections of empty seats climbing toward the upper levels of the arena. It was impossible to ignore. What should have been a triumphant moment felt uncomfortably hollow. Rather than a celebration, the finals became a mirror reflecting a deeper problem the league had long avoided confronting. The message was clear and unsettling. The WNBA's visibility and momentum were not truly self-sustaining. Without one name drawing attention, the spectacle collapsed. That name was Caitlin Clark. As the finals tipped off, Clark was sidelined with a groin injury, missing her third straight game as the Indiana Fever continued without her. With her absence, the excitement vanished almost instantly. The illusion of growth cracked, exposing a fragile reality beneath the surface. If the league's future depends so heavily on one player, what does that reveal about the current state of women's basketball? What happens when the spotlight fades during the sport's most important moment? As finals week approached, anticipation should have been reaching its peak. Two respected franchises were preparing to clash for a title. The Las Vegas Aces, defending champions led by one of the most dominant players the league has ever seen, were ready to protect their crown. The Connecticut Sun, fueled by their own stars and years of frustration, arrived determined to finally break through. Every ingredient for a classic championship showdown was in place. The narratives were obvious. This should have been must-watch television for anyone claiming to support the game. Then reality hit. Fans browsing ticket listings were stunned. Finals seats were available for as little as $30. Not obstructed views tucked behind pillars, but solid seats with clear sightlines to a court where history was supposedly unfolding. $30 for a championship game quickly became a joke online. Screenshots spread rapidly. Even people who had never watched a WNBA game were asking the same question: how could a professional league's finals be valued less than an average night out? The contrast felt even sharper when compared to discussions around player pay and long-standing financial disparities. The pricing revealed an uncomfortable truth about the market. Demand simply wasn't there. Despite months of glowing coverage framing the WNBA as a league surging forward, despite repeated claims of growth and momentum, the finals audience failed to materialize. Ticket platforms showed availability across nearly every section. Premium seats that should have been gone weeks earlier sat untouched. The secondary market, which usually explodes during championship events, completely collapsed. Resellers who expected a surge were left scrambling, cutting prices just to escape losses. Observers inside the industry pointed to the factor league officials avoided saying out loud. Caitlin Clark wasn't playing. The Indiana Fever had been eliminated before the finals began, and with them went the massive audience that had followed Clark throughout her rookie season. Her games delivered television ratings the league had never experienced. Arenas that once struggled suddenly sold out when the Fever arrived. Merchandise moved at unprecedented levels. Online engagement soared. All of it traced back to one player who turned women's basketball into must-see entertainment for millions of casual viewers. When Clark was gone, those viewers disappeared too. They didn't transition into general WNBA fans. They didn't adopt new teams or rivalries. Their loyalty was to Clark alone. The finals made that dependence impossible to deny. Months of momentum evaporated the moment the league's central figure exited the picture. What remained was a championship played in a vacuum, a stark reminder of how much work still lies ahead. She had spent her entire career chasing moments like this. Seasons of relentless work when hardly anyone was watching. Years of pushing for acknowledgement that never seemed to arrive. Years of trusting that elite performance would eventually be met with the respect and attention the sport deserved. By the time she reached the finals, A'ja Wilson was the league's MVP, already cemented as one of the most dominant players in the history of women's basketball. She rose into her jumper and calmly dropped the ball over Kalani Brown's outstretched arm, fully prepared to defend a championship in what should have been a charged, unforgettable atmosphere. Instead, the scene unsettled her. During warm-ups before Game 1, Wilson glanced around the arena. Everywhere she looked, there were empty sections. Red seats stood out clearly, visible no matter where the cameras turned. The environment felt less like a championship stage and more like an ordinary regular season night against a struggling opponent. A player who had carried her team all year, who had reached a level few athletes in any sport ever touch, was about to play the biggest game of her life in front of a crowd that felt uncomfortably thin. Quietly, almost under her breath, she said the words that would come to define the entire series: "This is the finals." The disbelief was unmistakable. It wasn't entitlement. It was the shock of someone realizing how wide the gap was between what she had earned and what she was receiving. Diana Taurasi recognized the same truth immediately. Chasing a loose 50-50 ball, the league's all-time scoring leader processed the scene with her usual blunt clarity. Taurasi, a player who had lived through every era of the WNBA and seen its highs and lows firsthand, understood exactly what those empty seats represented. They were not an accident. They were a statement. All the talk about growth, progress, and finally being taken seriously dissolved the moment reality became visible. The league's biggest stage was drawing a crowd that would have been disappointing for a random midweek game. In her post-game comments, Taurasi didn't hide behind polished answers or careful phrasing. Speaking with the weight of someone who had waited her entire career for moments like this, she said what many were thinking: you spend your whole life working for opportunities like these, and you just hope people care enough to show up. That single sentence carried decades of frustration. The battles for better pay, better facilities, better coverage, and basic respect were all supposed to lead to this moment. Yet the championship, the highest point the league had to offer, unfolded in front of scattered fans inside an arena that wasn't even particularly large. The contrast with the regular season was impossible to ignore. When Caitlin Clark played, arenas sold out. Television ratings surged. Social media flooded with highlights, debates, and viral clips. Mainstream sports media paid attention in a way it rarely had before. But a finals without Clark produced almost nothing. Engagement was flat. Coverage was minimal. Clips that normally would have spread across platforms vanished without impact. It felt as if the broader sports world had collectively decided the championship didn't matter. Then the numbers appeared. Polls asking fans whether they planned to watch the finals delivered a staggering result. 96% said no. 96%. A title series featuring elite teams, star players, and legitimate historical weight was being ignored by nearly everyone who had followed the league just weeks earlier. The remaining 4% were treated almost like outliers, willing to watch something the majority had already dismissed. Those poll results spread rapidly, not as promotion, but as spectacle. Commentators who rarely mentioned the WNBA suddenly took interest, not because of the basketball, but because the collapse itself was dramatic enough to become a story. The connection to Clark's absence was impossible to deny. During the regular season, her games shattered every previous ratings benchmark. Indiana Fever matchups routinely outperformed the rest of the league combined. Arenas that had struggled with attendance for years suddenly sold out the moment the Fever arrived. The financial reality was clear. Clark wasn't just popular, she was the primary engine driving league-wide attention. Speculation exploded about what finals ratings would have looked like had Indiana advanced. Estimates suggested ticket prices would have started in the hundreds. Courtside seats might have climbed into the thousands. The buildings would have been packed, buzzing with energy equal to the stakes. None of that happened. The player most fans wanted to watch was gone, and with her went the momentum. This created an uncomfortable reality league officials were reluctant to address. For years, the WNBA had promoted narratives of team parity, rising stars across multiple franchises, and a product worthy of attention regardless of who was on the floor. But the finals told a different story, one that could no longer be explained away. The finals stripped away any remaining illusions about what was really driving interest. The carefully constructed narratives about league-wide appeal and team-based loyalty were revealed as hopeful fiction. Viewers were not tuning in for the WNBA as an abstract institution. They were tuning in for Caitlin Clark. Remove her from the equation, and the audience vanished with her. The relationship was that direct and that unforgiving. League executives attempted to present the finals as a collision of legacy franchises filled with meaningful storylines. The Aces defending their crown. The Sun chasing their first championship. Established stars seeking moments that would define their careers. Rising players stepping into the spotlight. On paper, the promotional framework looked solid. In reality, it failed to resonate with the viewers the league most needed. The issue was never about marketing slogans or broadcast polish. It was structural. The WNBA had not succeeded in building transferable interest. Fans drawn in by Clark were never guided toward other teams or other players. They were not given reasons to care beyond the singular star who had first captured their attention. When she was eliminated, those fans didn't migrate elsewhere. They simply disengaged. That failure represented a staggering missed opportunity. The regular season had delivered the largest audience the league had ever seen. Record-breaking crowds, historic television numbers, and millions of first-time viewers had entered the ecosystem of women's basketball. The potential to convert that surge into lasting fandom existed at a scale the league had never experienced. But sustained growth does not happen automatically. It requires deliberate effort. Introducing fans to multiple personalities, expanding narratives beyond one figure, and making newcomers feel welcomed rather than scrutinized. That work was never fully done. Instead of leveraging Clark's popularity to lift the entire league, much of the conversation surrounding her became adversarial. Veteran players who could have been positioned as additional attractions instead became associated with resistance toward the new audiences Clark brought with her. The tone around the sport during the regular season often felt tense instead of inclusive. Fans who showed up because of Clark were frequently told, implicitly and explicitly, that they were not real supporters. The finals exposed the consequences of that posture. Once Clark was gone, those fans had no incentive to remain. They had not been encouraged to follow Aya Wilson as a transcendent talent in her own right. They had not been guided toward appreciating Diana Taurasi's historic legacy or the Connecticut Sun's championship pursuit. Treated as temporary visitors, they behaved exactly like temporary visitors, leaving as soon as their reason for arriving disappeared. The empty arenas revealed something deeper than a promotional misstep. They exposed a cultural fracture that had been widening all season. Veteran players repeatedly voiced frustration about the attention Clark received. They questioned the authenticity of fans who followed only one player. They framed new audiences as outsiders rather than valuable additions. Those attitudes carried consequences. Fans notice how they are described. When newcomers are dismissed as bandwagon followers who don't understand the game, they receive a clear signal about whether they belong. When players openly resent crowds that show up for a single star, those crowds learn their presence is not appreciated. That resentment may have felt justified to athletes who had labored for years without recognition, but it undermined the league's ability to transform short-term attention into long-term loyalty. Taurasi's post-game remarks about deserving full arenas sparked immediate debate because the context was so charged. Many sympathized completely. Championship basketball should be played in front of packed houses. Veterans who built the league deserved respect and visibility. That frustration was real and understandable. But others pointed out the contradiction. Some of the same voices upset about empty finals crowds had spent the season criticizing the very fans who could have filled those seats. They dismissed Clark's audience as less informed, less authentic, and less worthy. Then they expressed shock when that audience declined to support a championship featuring players who had spent months signaling their disapproval. The irony was impossible to ignore. You cannot tell fans they don't matter and then expect them to show up when you need them. The cost of that division was enormous. Energy that could have been used to grow the sport was instead consumed by internal tension. Coverage that should have celebrated elite basketball focused on conflict and resentment. Momentum that should have carried through the postseason evaporated the moment the league's primary draw exited the picture. The finals demonstrated what happens when cultural rifts are allowed to deepen instead of being addressed. The league was forced to confront a reality it had long avoided. Interest remained concentrated around individual personalities rather than institutional loyalty. When those personalities were present, attention reached historic highs. When they were absent, interest collapsed so completely that championship games could not fill arenas, even with deeply discounted tickets. The finals confirmed what leadership was unwilling to admit publicly: even the highest-stakes moments in women's basketball could not sustain attention without the specific stars fans wanted to watch. That dependency raised uncomfortable questions about the future. Sustainable growth requires multiple compelling figures across multiple teams. It requires reasons to watch regardless of who is on the floor on any given night. It demands an identity that survives injuries, retirements, and generational transitions. The league did not yet have that infrastructure. It had Caitlin Clark. And when she wasn't playing, it had empty seats and championship tickets that felt like clearance items no one wanted. Veteran players understood this truth, even as it cut deeply. Their frustration during the finals wasn't just about attendance figures. It was about confronting evidence that their excellence alone could not command the attention they believed it deserved. Aya Wilson, a two-time MVP performing at a historic level. Diana Taurasi, one of the greatest players the sport has ever known. Neither could move the needle the way a rookie from Indiana could without effort. That reality was painful. These were athletes who had sacrificed years fighting for recognition that rarely came, who endured decades of limited exposure and constant skepticism about the league's viability. They believed that excellence would eventually be rewarded. The finals should have been that reward. Instead, they unfolded in front of scattered crowds and widespread indifference. The league now stood at a crossroads. It could continue blaming marketing, pricing, or fan ignorance. It could resent audiences that only appeared for one star. Or it could confront the truth the finals made undeniable. The WNBA had become reliant on a single rookie, and it had no clear plan for sustaining interest without her. The choice ahead was stark. Either the league would learn to embrace star power, welcome the fans those stars attract, and convert attention into lasting loyalty, or it would continue alienating its own audience and watching empty.